All right. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. This is Kaustav Jagtap, or KJ. I'm the Director of Product Marketing here at SafeBreach. I wanted to thank each and every one of you for taking the time to attend our interactive webinar today. Before we get started, I wanted to remind everyone that this webinar is being recorded and will be shared with all the registrants and attendees after the event is complete. It would also be available on our website on demand, as well as our YouTube channel at any given point in time after tomorrow, I believe. At any given point of time, if you do have any questions about the content that is being discussed here or SafeBreach in general, please feel free to go ahead and send us a note, or if you want to ask it right away, use the Q&A functionality in Zoom webinar so that we can promptly answer all your questions at the end of the session. Again, this is KJ here. We are going to go ahead and get started. As everyone is aware, Continuous Threat Exposure Management, or CTEM, is a formal five-stage program. The term was coined by Gartner, and it's designed to essentially help organizations better manage their risk, the cyber risk, by finding and mitigating or taking care of advanced threats in an ongoing, proactive manner, and obviously prioritized manner. And this program typically has cyclical phases of scoping, discovery, prioritization, validation, mobilization, and each of them do serve a very important purpose. What we are going to focus on today essentially is understanding how or what CTEM really is, and how the continuous and automated nature of breach and attack simulation, or BAS tools, can make it a powerful addition for large enterprises looking to improve the readiness, resilience, and efficacy of their overall security operations. We are also going to try and cover, why continuous validation plays a key role in CTEM, and how, and as I mentioned earlier, how BAS can play a very important role in this CTEM methodology. Today's speakers, we have two amazing folks here. Our first presenter is our rockstar senior PM, Shira, who is extremely proficient in customer engagement and exploration, identifying and talking to customers to help identify their problems in software lifecycle processes and tracking feature success. And combining all of this business intelligence, or any intelligence that she as a PM, or in general as an expert, gathers and conveys that in a very articulate manner. Our second speaker is Michael, or MDG as we like to call him. He is the head of global sales engineering for SafeBreach, and has years of technology, sales engineering, solutions architecture, and system management experience. With that being said, let's go ahead and get started. So as I mentioned, CTEM was a term that was coined by Gartner, I believe, a couple of years ago. And according to Gartner, by 2026, organizations that leverage the CTEM methodology will be able to observe a reduction in their breaches by 2/3. And there are various reasons to it, but obviously the continuous part of the threat exposure management plays a key role. With that being said, over to you, Shira, to help our audience understand what CTEM is and how we can help them.
Great. Thanks, KJ. Yeah, so this CTEM, Continuous Threat Exposure Management, is a term that's kind of being heard a lot lately. And it really, I think, embodies a lot of the various aspects of threat detection and hunting, and a lot of the activities that many security teams are facing today. And it really gives a very convenient framework for kind of looking at the various types of threats and understanding how they can be mitigated. So as KJ mentioned, this is a term that was coined by Gartner a couple of years ago. And this is a program, an approach, a methodology, with the aim of reducing cyber exposure across a wide network. Obviously, many enterprise companies have very, very large networks, so this isn't something that's going to be done all at once, but rather this is a cyclical and also very informed and contextual approach that allows you to kind of pass through the stages, move the information that you gained from each stage into the next stage in order to kind of make those more informed decisions. And eventually the aim is, again, to kind of create alignment, to create processes that work well, that work efficiently, and that allow you to mitigate those exposures that are identified in a fast and efficient way as much as possible. As you can see in the visual here that we took from Gartner, it's kind of broken down, aside from the 5 steps that we mentioned, it's also broken down into kind of 2 umbrella categories. The first one being the diagnosis of the threats and the various attack surface that you're interested in testing for any given cycle. And then the second part is actually taking the action. So that's the part that contains both the validation and the mobilization, actually the remediation process, and the engagement of the relevant resources in order to make sure that whatever gaps or exposures are identified are closed in a timely manner, so that the whole cycle can begin once again. So let's dive in a little bit into the various phases, kind of explain what the essence is behind each of these phases so that we can kind of understand how the full program looks like. And then we'll dive in a little bit deeper to the world of validation and BAS and continuous validation. So the first stage is scoping. Scoping is more of an organizational exercise. The idea here is to really understand what is the scope of the attack surface that you want to test. Obviously, with today's threat landscape and with the large networks that enterprise organizations usually have and the complex topographies, it's not possible to test everything all at once. So rather, the idea here is to focus on the objectives of the security team, which will obviously need to align with, the business goals and the goals of the particular cycle that we're currently focusing on. So that's kind of the definition of where within our larger attack surface we want to focus our efforts. And I'll mention here again the fact that this is cyclical. So we carry out this cycle many times, and during each cycle, as we progress, we can expand the scope within our attack surface, and eventually we'll kind of know that we're doing the testing in a comprehensive manner that covers all of the important areas that we know align with our business goals. So that's kind of the idea of scoping. I'll also mention that some examples, thanks, KJ. Some examples could be, maybe focusing on, are we focusing on external threats? Are we focusing on internal threats, on things that are malicious, on things that are inadvertent? So for example, inadvertent external risk could be kind of that part of the attack surface, could be something that might be introduced via, third-party applications that are in use. Inadvertent internal risk might be negligence or misconfigurations that are done by employees, whereas malicious external risk is obviously risk that's coming from hackers, nation state actors, etc. And malicious internal risk would be something that comes from rogue employees, for example. So those are all kinds of ideas that you can focus on when you're trying to understand where you want to focus your efforts within the attack surface. Okay, great. The next stage is discovery. So the idea here is to really understand where the biggest risk lies. Once we have kind of narrowed down the scope of the attack surface, and we want to kind of within that scope understand all of the various risk factors that we might be facing. Obviously, vulnerability management is a great tool to start with, but there are also a variety of different entities within the attack surface that are really worth considering when you're looking at kind of a wider attack surface. Things like Active Directory, misconfigurations, weak credentials, expired certificates, even social media accounts. That's also part of your attack surface. And those are things that sometimes kind of get lost when you're very, very focused on just looking at the long list of vulnerabilities. So it's really important to kind of keep an open mind and make sure that we're not missing those corners. Once we have kind of a mapping of the attack surface that we're really looking at, the idea here is to now define risk profiles. So the risk profiles really allow a quantitative and objective analysis of the various entities that you're finding. And what the things that you want to take into consideration here are obviously the impact that a risk for that particular attack surface entity might have, and also the likelihood of that happening. So we kind of use the risk profiles to understand where the greatest risk lies after we've mapped out the attack surface. Great. The next step is prioritization. If you remember when I kind of was introducing, I mentioned the fact that it's contextual. Obviously, the scope that we defined in step 1 fed into the discovery that we carried out in step 2. And now the risk profiles that we established in step 2 are going to be feeding into step 3, which is prioritization. So we're going to take those risk profiles. We're going to add additional considerations such as the severity of the type of threat that might affect those particular assets, if there are any compensating controls. So if we know that there are compensating controls that cover a specific asset, that might give us more confidence that maybe that's an area that's more protected, whereas a different asset that doesn't have any security controls might require more attention. Additionally, the risk appetite. So sometimes, certain companies realize that they're willing to accept a certain level of risk. So these are all things that need to be taken into consideration. But at the end of the day, this allows us to really find those assets with the risk profiles that truly rise to the top. And the idea here is to take those top risk profiles, those top assets, and identify any low-hanging fruit that can be dealt with quickly, and also identify the more complex behaviors that also need to be remediated, but we know that we need to focus on them specifically. So that kind of wraps up the diagnosis part. And at this point, we have a list of assets that we know, are very important to us and align with our goals. And now is when we get into the action side of things. Okay, so now is actually the validation stage. This allows us to test the various processes and procedures that we have in place. This is where we really take those assets that we ranked and prioritized and carry out real life testing in some way to really raise our confidence in potential treatments, for example, seeing that those actually work. It also allows us to really understand that the direction that we're going in terms of the way that we want to remediate those problems, that is indeed the correct way. And these tools, these validation tools that are part of this step, that enable this step, they really allow recreating real world threats and then seeing the reactions of the employees to those threats. In many cases, this can help us understand, for example, if additional education might make an impact, or maybe increasing coverage that we have for the types of testing that we're doing. So it's really very revealing about our processes and allows us to improve. Another thing that validation does is testing the security controls. So this allows us to kind of justify some of our investment strategies in terms of being able to show ROI on specific controls. So that's kind of the side of the validation, and the point here is really increasing confidence. You don't need to guess if your suggested treatments for those assets are going to work. You can really check it and validate it yourself. Okay, and the last step is mobilization. Here again, kind of like scoping, this is more of an alignment-based step. The idea here is to really foster efficient and a quick remediation process by fostering collaboration and communication between the various teams. In large enterprises, there are often many teams that might be involved in remediation. So we want to make sure that we're cutting through the red tape and that everything is working smoothly. And in order for that to happen, we need to make sure that we have a very clear way of communicating and demonstrating the various gaps that were found, the various exposures that were found. And once that alignment exists, it's much, much easier to engage the resources that are needed. The various remediation teams that can take the information that was found, implement it within the network, and then we can know that, we closed that loop, we closed that cycle, we took our goal, we followed it through, we fixed it, and now we can focus on the next scope. So those are the 5 stages. Great, thanks. So just I'll reiterate once more, and I'm sure that anybody who's gotten a chance to read a little bit about CTEM has kind of heard the sentence that CTEM is not a tool, it's a program. There are all kinds of different stages. Each stage has its own objective and its own idea behind it, and there are a variety of tools that can help contribute to achieving those goals for each of the steps. For discovery, for example, if we want to look into our attack surface, obviously we would want to use something like attack surface management tools, either internal or external. For the prioritization side of things, today, vulnerability management, since there are so many vulnerabilities that are included in those kinds of feeds, they often have some kind of prioritization algorithm built in. So that's something that can be leveraged as well. And in validation as well, there are a variety of different tools, be they breach and attack simulation or penetration testing or automated pen testing that kind of augments the red teaming. Each one of these tools has a bit of a different emphasis, but at the end of the day, the goal for all of these validation tools is to help you check various aspects of your security posture and how your controls are able to handle and perform specific threats and how those assets are protected. But since each one of them has a different emphasis, it's really important to understand which tools can be most helpful in achieving the goal that you need for your particular testing needs. So with that, I'll hand it over to Michael, who can kind of give more context on that point as well.
Thank you, Sarah. So, one of the key emphases here with CTEM, right, as a program is continuous. And so the continuous validation plays a big role in that validation phase that Sarah was talking about. And there are a number of different methods and tools available on the market, as you're listed in that last slide, that can help you reach that goal of continuous validation. But not all are appropriate for each environment. Not all are appropriate for each goal that you're trying to accomplish within the program. But let's talk a little bit about what are the key elements of continuous validation. So the first thing is tracking your posture over time against the regular threat scenario. So showing improvement over time, identifying drift from what you're expecting, all of which is trying to stay ahead of an adversary, right? And one of the whole goals of CTEM is to try and manage that exposure and stay ahead of a potential breach. Second thing is measuring how the tools and processes are working within the organization. Which ones are blocking those threats? How are you doing on mitigating the exposure? So feeding into validation information or feeding validation information into the remediation cycle, and doing this continuously, right? Identifying what threats are being blocked, what threats are being missed, and validating when you're doing remediation that exposure is coming down. Verifying suggested treatments, right? So again, it kind of goes back into that mitigating the exposure and verifying when you've applied the treatments to the environment, ensuring that what you have done and what you've mitigated does not actually impact the operations of the organization, but also is driving down that risk and increasing your security efficacy. And then the last thing, again, continuing this cycle is the continuous validation, validating your posture after the remediation, continuing that cycle. And these 4 steps are what you're going to continue to go through as part of this continuous validation cycle. So what are some of the advantages of breach and attack simulation in continuous validation? BAS have some unique advantages here against other security validation tools, and also manual efforts that happen. So with a BAS tool, you're going to have the ability to continuously validate what you've deployed within your organization, right? So regularly and continuously challenging your security controls, understanding how they're going to respond, and having some automation there, right? The ability to do this without having to bring in a third party to do a penetration test or an assessment. BAS tools are very good at prioritizing threats based on their impact to the business. So this is drawing in the context of your environment, understanding the importance of certain areas, understanding the importance of certain workflows, et cetera, and being able to prioritize what threat has the biggest impact to the organization. A good BAS tool is also going to be able to continuously monitor and communicate this posture to the key stakeholders. And stakeholders can be anything from a practitioner who is out there wanting to understand, okay, is the particular tool that I am responsible for drifting away from the expected behaviors or what I put in place and what I expect it to do, all the way up to the executive leadership who need to communicate how the security posture is to the organization and what those needs are of the organization to drive additional investments into tools, rationalization of programs, et cetera. And BAS tools do a really good job of being able to do that on a continuous basis. And then the last thing is coming back to, again, testing those treatments again, right? So when you're running a continuous testing program using a BAS tool, you're going to be regularly testing, you've applied remediations, and you're going to be able to ensure that those remediations stay in place and don't drift away. So there are some challenges here, and there are a lot of benefits to a CTEM program. And I think some of these challenges actually get addressed and handled through the benefits of a CTEM program. But let's talk about a few of these. So the primary benefit, right, is a proactive management of risk, right? That you are continuously testing, you're continuously evaluating your exposure, you're going to have a much better view of your risk. You're going to be out ahead of the adversary, and also driving down the risk of that adversary making positive gains, if you will, into your organization. Obviously, improved visibility in threats. So if you're testing against a wide variety of different adversarial techniques, if you're continuously assessing all of your exposures and identifying where you may have new risks and then testing those, you're going to have a way better view of your threat exposure. And the same thing feeds into that prioritization, right? Since you're testing continuously, you're improving your visibility, you're going to have a much more rapid and better prioritization of those threats because you're understanding what those threats are doing in your environment. Everyone wants to improve their resilience, and continuous methodology is going to help you improve that resilience. You're going to be more resilient to an emerging threat because you're baselining and testing your organization continuously. Contextual and actionable insights. This is really important. And this is something that a CTEM program, because of all of those different phases that Shira talked about, feed into each other. You're going to understand the context of what your environment is, and so when you're doing validation, when you're doing testing, you're going to know what that impact is, and then you're going to be able to take that data and have actionable insights, so that you can make quick decisions on what needs to be done to lower a risk, add a new tool, change a process, et cetera. Then obviously having some sort of program around exposure management is going to help better align with the organizational objectives, both risk and the business. So, I mean, if you think about that, that's a fairly comprehensive list of benefits. Looking at more of the challenges side, one of the biggest challenges I think any cybersecurity organization faces alignment. So within each organization, there could be silos. Whose responsibility is what? Who is responsible for gathering all the information in the discovery phase? Is that what does that output look like? Who needs to consume that? And so you're going to you could potentially have misalignments on the expectations of what you need to really beneficially implement a CTEM program. resource constraints. Every organization has resource constraints, right? So they're going to have, whether it's budget constraints, you have difficulty adding the tools to actually implement a CTEM program effectively. You don't have the necessary personnel to implement the program. I would argue that in many instances, the tools that you are bringing into a CTEM program and implementing that program may actually help with those resource constraints. As you're introducing automation, you're introducing tools that would otherwise be done by a manual process or by an individual. You're going to be able to allocate those resources to other aspects of the program. So I would argue that a resource constraint can actually be reduced by implementing something like CTEM. I'm going to move down. There's a couple other ones that I want to talk about here. The idea to be more proactive versus reactive, right? Organizations in cybersecurity, particularly, have been built up to this idea that you need to respond to an active threat. That's what we build. That's what our controls are about. That's what a lot of our processes are built around. Is a threat has been detected. Now, how do we respond to that? It takes a change in mindset when you're implementing a CTEM program to go from being very reactive to a threat, very reactive to something in the organization, to being more proactive. And that may change, that may actually introduce changes to processes, that may introduce changes to various tool sets that you have, and then also just an overall mindset that may need to be changed. So you may fight a little bit of an uphill battle within an organization because we've always been, from a cybersecurity perspective, into this a reactive mindset versus that proactive mindset. And then the last thing is cybersecurity in general and risk overall have a very big ecosystem. A lot of different tools, a lot of different KPIs, a lot of different methodologies out there, and you need to be able to integrate all of those together to really have an effective CTEM program. Obviously, cybersecurity is getting better with this. We're seeing a lot of ecosystem integration across the board, but this can be a challenge as well. Is if you have a very large ecosystem of risk and cybersecurity tools, being able to get them all to talk together, being able to get the right data from one to the other, and then being able to report that up can be a challenge for an organization who's looking to implement a CTEM program. So some key things to consider when you're building your program. Adversaries are using all sorts of different techniques. They're constantly changing what they're doing, and so considering that you really should have a breadth of both detection and testing capabilities, right? So the ability to not just detect something at an endpoint with EDR, but also thinking about a full kill chain of different ways that an adversary will try to gain access and move through an organization. So having a breadth of different detection capabilities is really going to be something you're going to need to consider when you're looking to build out your program. Environment visibility. Do the tools that you have scale to your enterprise? You can have some of the best tools in the world, but if you're only looking at a very small section of your organization because the tool can't scale to the enterprise level, you're going to lose visibility. And you're going to lose the benefit of doing that continuous cycle here because you're not really looking at your environment as a whole. You're looking at very small sections. So having tools that can grow with your organization and cover your enterprise. I've talked about contextualization. I think it's really important. Tools that can help you contextualize the risk in the context of what you've got in your organization. How important is this workflow? How important is this application? These particular users carry a very high risk or very important to the organization. You're going to get a lot more value out of this program because you're going to be able to understand what that impact is when you're using those tools in those various parts of the program. Automatic and continuous testing capabilities, right? So we talked about this with BAS, right? Is Automation is going to improve everything, right? It's going to make things quicker. You're going to have better ability to respond, better ability to identify risks. And so this is key, right? What can actually be done in an automated fashion and what can be done continuously? Implementing quarterly penetration testing is not going to give you a lot of value versus something like a BAS tool, which is going to be able to test on that continuous nature and also give you automation on top of it. Remediation, actionability, and prioritization. It's really great if you can get the information. Okay, here's where our risk lies, and here's where that is in the organization. But if you actually can't take action on that without, you don't have the ability to get information to do something with that and prioritize what it is, the tool may not give you any sort of value into the overall program. And the last thing, executive reporting, right? So, I hear this a lot when I'm talking to my customers, is the idea that leadership needs to understand the risk posed to the organization. They need to understand what those KPIs are, and they need to report those not only just to their leadership, but also other parts of the business to be able to drive continuous improvement. And a tool without good executive reporting is not going to help you get there. Being able to consume that data in and then being able to present it in meaningful ways is really critical to building this program so that you can continuously improve your organization, continuously understand your exposures, and really have a much bigger picture of the risk that you have.
Great, thanks, Michael. So yeah, I just want to wrap up from the product perspective. SafeBreach really aligns with the CTEM approach. We believe that it's a very comprehensive way of identifying risk and identifying exposures and really kind of finding the best way to mitigate them and to close that gap quickly. And a lot of our upcoming roadmap really aligns with that, both things that we've been putting an effort on and an emphasis on these past few months, and also the upcoming features that we're going to be working on in the next few months and towards the end of the year. So if we're kind of looking at it phase by phase, there are all kinds of different features and offerings that kind of line up. So first of all, scoping, as I mentioned, it's more of an organizational exercise, but I will note that we have our SafeBreach services experts that have really proven themselves as strategic partners for some of our customers who have needed some help in kind of mapping out where they want to focus their testing as they kind of work through it. Since, again, as we mentioned, you can't test everything all at once with the threat landscape that we have today. In terms of discovery, so SafeBreach has a wide array of integrations which kind of allow pulling in information during testing and understanding kind of where risk lies, kind of getting that feedback directly from the controls, and kind of identifying the critical areas and the critical assets, as we mentioned. Prioritization, so again, the whole idea of contextualization that Michael mentioned before, the ability to really match it into your environment, not just talk hypothetically, but really know what the impact is on your particular environment within your particular organization. Really makes a big difference in your ability to choose the places where you want to put your effort, and that will make the biggest impact. In terms of validation, obviously, SafeBreach is constantly maintaining our threat coverage. We have the largest playbook, which we're also constantly working on. And just in general, our architecture is very flexible, and it knows how to deal with a variety of different deployments, different enterprise setups. And in terms of mobilization, again, what Michael mentioned just a moment ago regarding the executive reporting, I totally agree with that. If you're not able to communicate up to your executives and to their executives how we're doing and how you're improving, it's gonna be a lot harder to gain that buy-in and to move the processes along in terms of remediating the gaps that are identified. So SafeBreach has been lately putting a lot of effort in kind of making sure that our reports are flexible, that they can be customized for a variety of different stakeholders, whether it's those executives, whether it's a more operational practitioner that's working on actually making those fixes and needs the nitty-gritty information. So we kind of have a wide array of capabilities in terms of our reporting, so that we can really foster that communication that we mentioned before. So that's it from our side, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that come up. And thank you again for joining us.
Thank you so much, Michael, and thank you so much, Shira, for taking the time to kind of walk our audience through the CTEM methodology and how SafeBreach is currently and planning to, in the future, support CTEM. I think the key thing here is to remember, I think that the continuous part of it is the key here to remember. And even CISA, for that matter, is now every time they release the cert alerts, which we support in 24 hours, they make it a point to say validate your security controls. And it's not typically a do once and forget about it kind of an approach. It needs to be continuously done, because if you see these alerts, most of them in the recent past have been essentially updates to previous alerts, because threat actors are constantly innovating their IOCs and TTPs, but they base them off of their traditional typical attacks. So continuous is the key. With that being said, I do want to remind everyone that we are in the Q&A phase right now. So if you do have any questions about the content that we shared or about anything in SafeBreach in general, please use the Q&A functionality. We do have a couple of questions that have come up. So I would like the panelists, or Michael and Shira, can answer them. The first question is pertaining to KPIs. So question is, how do you measure the success of your CTEM implementation? What typical KPIs would you consider for this?
So I'll kick it off, and Michael, feel free to add on to what I'm saying. So first of all, obviously, and again, this ties into the continuous nature, but the ability to kind of measure yourself and your improvement over time. In SafeBreach specifically, we have a security posture score, which is a very convenient tool for kind of seeing that progression over time. So first of all, that's a very easy way to track whether your exposures are indeed being mitigated and whether you're reducing that risk as you continue testing and as you continue applying those treatments. Another KPI I think that can definitely be measured is, the time of completing that cycle. So as the processes and as the alignment improves and as the processes get quicker and better, you would expect kind of the cycle to work more smoothly from time to time. And that way you can kind of expand the scope of what you're looking at from cycle to cycle. Michael, is there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think the key one to me, and that you mentioned it, is improvement over time. The continuous nature of CTEM is designed to help you drive towards that improvement, and then reaching that good steady state and acceptable level of risk. I mean, there are other more technical KPIs that you can feed into the program, things like mean time to detect, mean time to repair, showing improvement on those, because as you're going through the cycle, you're going to get better and better at improving those really technical KPIs. But I do think overall, the overarching KPI should be improvement over time. And that's going to come in a number of different areas based on the tools that you implement for the various elements of the program.
Thank you both. Second question that I have here is, how do organizations integrate CTEM with their existing cybersecurity and risk management frameworks?
Yeah, so we touched on this a little bit, but again, since CTEM isn't something that is embodied in a single tool, but rather it requires tools. So it's very likely that you already have at least some of these tools within your environment. And now it's a matter of kind of reappropriating them to kind of match the goals that you're aiming for as part of this cycle. And as Michael also mentioned before, I mean, this is also a good opportunity to kind of measure those tools for each of the stages and seeing if they're, really delivering on what they promise in terms of, the ROI, and seeing that you're using them well. Michael, I don't know if you want to add on top of that.
Yeah, I think a a lot of the different cybersecurity frameworks also that are out there, if we think of more away from the tool, but more to the framework, actually are going to provide you with great data points into the program at various stages of the program, right? So things like MITRE ATT&CK definitely are going to feed you data points that you can use to describe that element of improvement over time, evaluation of controls, evaluation of processes, right? We talk a lot about controls themselves, but there's processes that go on after the controls that also will be things that you'll consider as part of your program. So these different frameworks that are out there are definitely going to help provide data points. They may actually accelerate different elements of the program as well, as if you've already implemented certain types of frameworks or aligning to certain types of frameworks. It may accelerate how you're going through your current cycle of looking at CTEM, the different phases, and then what you want to implement and what you need to change, et cetera. So.
Perfect. Last call for any questions. If not, then I would like to thank all of you who attended this webinar and listened to our experts, Michael and Shira, talk about CTEM and how SafeBreach does currently and plans to support CTEM in the future. With that being said, just a reminder again that this webinar was recorded and the recording will be shared with all the attendees after the webinar that's either later today or tomorrow. The webinar will also be available on demand on our website and also on our YouTube channel. With that being said, thank you again to everyone. Have a wonderful rest of the day and have a wonderful weekend. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.